Welcome to Beers with Contractors. We're cracking a cold one and taking a deep dive into the foundations of your business, pun intended, to unearth the strategies, techniques, and insider knowledge that can take your contracting business to the next level. So, grab your favorite beer, pull up a seat, and let's have a chat about the nuts and bolts of the construction industry.
All right, tradies. It's going to be a special day today because, we all have that authority in our lives that always tries to govern us and tell us what to do and all of that. But today, Dylan is not here today, but the man behind the curtain, Drake, our producer, is my co-host today. Drake, what is up?
What's up, man? I'm happy to step in and see if I can try and fill those big shoes that Dylan's leaving behind.
I'm incredibly disappointed that you weren't wearing a flannel shirt or a tool belt. Do you have work boots on at least?
Nope, forgot those.
Well,
but I came with research.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And articles.
Oh, there we go. Well, you did a better job than Dylan and I. We're trying to get better at show prep. We really. But yeah, so how's life been? You guys getting settled into spring and
Yeah, and I think all of Oklahoma is getting real settled into spring right now, as we have a storm watch right now with the tornadoes and everything coming. So we know it's storm season, so all the roofing contractors are excited.
I counted. I was on the way from a restaurant downtown to up here, and I counted 9 roofing trucks in that short little drive, 2 of which did not in-state license plates, go figure. But that's the way it is. I mean, hey, it's commerce. If you think about it, this is commerce. It's good. We're creating business in our markets. So
exactly.
But yeah, so I wanted to change topics today because to Drake, give you some background. I wanted to make sure I tapped into your knowledge while I had you in your face and your voice on camera. But I came from a conference this last week in Philadelphia, and I just spoke to our good friend Jimmy Robertson. I know he was on, I think episode -3 that we had. We focused really heavily on understanding finance and business at this conference, and I was talking to Jimmy, and just there's so many books out there that are just so theoretical about how to operate business, how to work on the business, not in the business, but none of them really get down into the nit and gritty of finance. And I was hoping to bend the ear of our few listeners. Ironically, we're less one listener this week because our guest is one of those 3 listeners. We've got an open slot on our roster of listeners right now, so send your applications to will@unisonworks.com. But we really tried to focus down on gross profit margin and break even and understanding the power of that in business and how many contractors don't know what their break even or gross profit margin is. And not only that, they don't even know how to quickly calculate it, which is a very simple formula. But I know through your consultancy and working with companies on a financial basis that, you find the same thing. So what's been your takeaway from it?
Well, you hear profit margin and you think that's the money I get at the end of the month, right? And that's what we're stuck in thinking. But what it really comes down to is you've got your direct costs and your indirect costs, right? So direct costs for a contractor, how much does it cost if I sell one job? What are my expenses tied to that job? How many people are on the job? How much labor do I have on the job? And how much, not your HR manager, but how much actual material are you putting on the job? And people just kind of forget about that. They go, I looked at my bank account, I'm good, right? And that's like, I've fallen into that when I was early in my business journey. And so I think that's where a lot of things can really happen. In the average construction company, I was looking this up before we got on here, the average profit margin is 3 to 7%.
Yeah, that's nuts. I mean, that's tiny.
You have to sell $1 million worth of business, do $1 million worth of revenue, just to make anywhere between 30 to 70,000.
Yeah, and that's take home for the owner most of the time. And it's like, man, that owner's making so much money. And like, we did an $8,000 job. He must be rich. And it's like, nah, you're probably making more than the owner.
Yeah, and you look back at it, and that's that feeling you get at the end of the month where you look back and you're like, I did so much revenue and nothing's left. And it's that sinking feeling, right? So anyway, to get to more of your question, like gross margin versus actual profit margin at the end of the day, if you are making let's say 80% gross margin, right? And you just change that 10% and you're operating on a 10% net margin take home, which would be great in the construction industry. If you have an 80% gross margin, your net margin's 10%, and you increase your gross margins to 90%, you increase your net margin, you double your net margin, you double your take home pay.
Well, and that's what we were talking about at this conference is like, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio in the results that lead to where if you can decrease your costs. And by the way, in my young days, I had a man smarter than me tell me, I think I was 22, 21 years old. And he said, cost is what you pay for it. Price is what the customer pays for it. And that was like a duh moment, like the Homer Simpson, like duh moment. So then that made me understand, okay, so what are my costs? And then realizing, if I can reduce costs by 1%, it doesn't equal 1% to the bottom line. It has a multiplying effect. And we were talking about this, and I recently spoke at the Philadelphia Basement Health Association event and showing, if you know this number, how powerful it is. Because when you know your gross profit margin, it gives you so much clear driving out of the windshield, not the rearview mirror, i.e., like, for example, if I discount 2 percentage points, how much more work do I have to do? And I want to give credit where credit is due. Martin Holland was a guest a while back, and I use his graphs, and I think it's important that we put that down in the show notes for resources, or email me, because I'm glad to share them, and I give credit to Martin for that. But also, if you increase prices, say 5%, we found if you have 35% gross margin and you increase your pricing, say 10%, you can get away with losing 22% of the work and still be just as profitable, if not more. So that's 22% less of fuel in those trucks, buying the materials, running to Lowe's and Home Depot, making sure Jimmy shows up on time or doesn't call in sick that day. It's just so much value that comes out of, understanding the power of gross profit margins.
I think that there's a couple of key things. So, people may go, okay, well, how do I calculate that if I'm a service? I'm not selling widgets, so I don't know what my cost of goods sold is. And I think that comes down to making sure you're tracking your time with your guys and your materials on each job specifically, right? And so making sure that you're allocating that, and just not saying, I have overhead. Like the big overhead category, you have to get in and like accurately detail how much of that is changing. And I think that's part of why your pay-per-performance app is really good, because you're actually adjusting the gross profit margin in that, like that all that goes specifically into the gross profit margin by adjusting and paying attention to the performance part of that.
Yeah. Well, but that's another thing is I think as contractors, we're also just fearful of change. And it's like, oh man, what do you mean I've got to change my policies around pay? And actually our guest today has some background in this as well, as it's like, man, but I don't want to affect like all this like rewarding efficiency. Man, that's so hard. And Stacy over there is so used to spending 7 hours a day running payroll. And it's like, stop doing that. I mean, but it's just kind of funny. And I say this, it sounds like I'm poking fun at our contractor brethren, but I should be saying, hey, this is probably one of the top, I would say 2 or 3 things that you need to make sure that before you leave today, you need to really know this number. And we started with this as understanding a break even. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your break even equals your fixed expenses divided by your gross profit margin. So when you know that, you can get your calculator out and bam, you know exactly how much money you got to clear before you even start making money. And we have trained our managers to know this on just a whim. So my formula was right, Drake?
I think so. I don't remember I always think of break even point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then we forget, like, just because you made it $1 over break even doesn't mean that you made $1 profit, right? You still have direct costs, like just because you did an extra job over break even, you still had to pay the foreman and the helpers, and you had to buy the materials and things like that. So, but anyways, I think this is just one big plug, once again, to go back to The Profit Problem by Martin Holland, because it is just such a powerful book. And we'll have another, Drake, if Dylan skimps out on us again, we need to have another one just on accrual accounting.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It would be the least listened to episode of all time, but I would listen to that over and over because anybody that knows me, I'm a fan of accrual accounting. So
the only people that'll listen to it are the people that want to be profitable and successful.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but yeah, there's a reason it works that way. So,
hey, Will, quick question. So on foundation repair, what's a good gross margin if you're looking at like as a benchmark in foundation repair?
Globally, depending on your services, 50 to 56%. And, that's why when you said 80% before, I was like, I would kill to have 80%. I just heard a giggle from Brandon, our guest, because he's like, yeah, we're in the wrong business if you're making 80%. But, in the foundation world, yeah, I mean, 50 to 56%. If you do a lot of concrete work, it could go higher. Obviously, steel has played a big part in that, back to cost, where, you just hope you have a good blend. But, well, cool. Well, by the way, Drake, shameless plug on you. You help companies with this, and we don't do a very good job of showcasing that. But how do people get a hold of you if they've got questions about this?
Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me is just on LinkedIn. So I kind of operate at the intersection of finance and technology. So, LinkedIn, Drake Scifers, easy to connect with me there.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, hey, I'm excited because today our guest flew all the way from my home state of North Carolina, and son of a bitch didn't bring me any Bojangles. I was a little pissed when I found that out. Our guest today is, it's kind of cool because he owns a foundation repair business called Foundation Doctor out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and he got started in this business in a weird way, but I want him to tell the story. But, I mean, what a company that's winning in the market because they've gotten 3 times Angie Super Service Awards. They're A+ rated in BBB. They've got a 4.9 on Google. I mean, and in a very crowded and competitive market and still winning. So I'm excited today. And there's another asterisk on his resume that we're going to bring up later, which is what about my journey as getting into software and tech. Our guest has been doing that as well. But I want to introduce Brandon Powell, a Foundation Doctor. Brandon, welcome to the Central Time Zone, buddy. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, I'm happy to be here and happy to be in Dylan's seat, and maybe this will be something going forward. I can take over for Dylan.
Yeah, if you play your cards right, we may have an open seat. So
we'll see how it goes. Yeah, but no, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you alluded to this, and by the way, we've had a blast. You coming to the office and meeting our team. Take us a little bit through the history, because you didn't say, "Hey, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to start crawling under houses and fixing foundations one day," right?
So yeah, it wasn't really an intentional kind of situation, strategic. It was more the opportunity presented itself. But prior to the construction world, I was working in banking for 15 years. So I had a 15-year stint in banking, and on the side, I started flipping homes with my brother. We did some real estate investing, and so we did a lot of that. And we got to a point where we had this one house that needed a ton of foundation work, probably about $40,000 or so, $30,000 or $40,000. So we had a group of guys that were really good at fixing just random stuff with the home renovation process, and so we gave it a shot, and it went really well. So we kind of parlayed that into another job, and at the same time, the way we were purchasing the foreclosures was changing as well. The market was getting competitive. So we just took that and just rolled our business into the foundation repair space. So, it wasn't necessarily looking at an opportunity, strategically taking it. It was just the opportunity presented itself.
So when you were flipping houses, because I've learned more and more about this over the last few years, there's a lot of different degrees to house flipping. Like and I'm not going to speak as if I'm the subject matter expert here, but I guess you have like wholesalers, and this sounds so bad, I don't even know who those are or what they do. But then you've got the contractors, and you got private lending, and I know about private lending, but And then you got cash out refinance, you got buy and hold. So what did you guys specifically do in that?
So we were the fix and flippers. So we did wholesale a couple of deals. We would purchase a deal and then maybe sell it to another investor occasionally. But most of the jobs we did, we purchased, renovated, and sold. So that was, I guess, in the industry, it's the fix and flipper is what we did. And honestly, it was tough because we wanted to always make the right decisions and fix up the home the way we thought it needed to be done. And honestly, that's a tough business to do that in, because most of the guys that were, making huge margins were just kind of skimping by and not making the right fixes. And so once we made the transition to, the foundation repair and doing the right thing for the customer, it felt a lot better it felt like more of a space that we need to be playing in anyway. So that was kind of a good fit for us.
Yeah. Kudos to you.
How do you feel like banking? So your background in banking, how do you think that helped you when you decided to start doing the foundation repair?
Well, that's a good question because there's not a ton of overlap there, but I do think that just having the structured environment, having managers, leading teams that, I was a team lead there. So just being able to lead people and just the analysis that I had to do. I was on I had a couple of different stints, but the last stint was had a lot of analysis to do with the mortgage industry. So being able to, understand, how to make money and how to analyze profit margins. So
I kind of feel like you were probably just 3 steps ahead of everybody else in the world. Brandon, and I know you're not going to give yourself credit here, but you got out of banking at probably a healthy time. Then you got out of house flipping at probably a healthy time.
Well, it's more of you just run away from the problem, right?
Oh.
You see it coming and you're like, oh, kind of pivot, like the Matrix. Just whoosh, whoosh.
Yeah. I've just fallen flat on my face out of industries on accident. So when I hear banking, I'm always like, when did you start getting into banking or when did you get out? And our previous guest, same timeline. And it was a perfect marry up to start into something else. So you mentioned something. You've got your brother. So who won all the fights growing up?
He would win them, but I would.
Hold on. He's not listening. It's okay, Brandon. You can lie.
No, there's no lying. He would win them, but I would also, go complaining to mom and then get him in trouble. So I could kind of instigate and then, I don't know who really won in that scenario.
Is working with your family just a stupid idea? And would you recommend it to somebody wanting to start their own company?
Good question. It kind of depends on, who you are and what your family is, right? We worked really well together, and he had strengths that I didn't have, and I had strengths that he didn't have. So it was a really good kind of marriage in that way. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I mean, having a partner just as an entrepreneur is really great if you can have that partnership, because it can be lonely as an entrepreneur, right? So being able to kind of go through those ups and downs with someone, whether it's family or a friend or that sort of thing, I think is definitely beneficial if you've got the right mindset going into it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said mindset, because I think a lot of contractors get into business with family knowing that either themselves or the family member will typically go underpaid, which most commonly we do, but also that they'll give more grace for failure, and they're not very good at holding each other accountable. And then we see that they never really kind of break through the $500,000 a year ceiling. It's a death spiral of just owner-operator lifestyle. So how did you and your brother kind of break out of that swing where so many others have failed?
So for us, it was actually a little bit easier in that regard because we weren't actually doing the work. We didn't come from the production side. So we had our crew that we had built out because we had day jobs for a few years before we went all into the house flipping. So we had to grow it for it to support us because we weren't actually, doing the work and not charging for our labor. We had to have a baseline of production that actually worked for us. So we started out of the gate knowing that we needed that to grow to get to that point. I mean, that didn't make it easy. Obviously, there were ups and downs. And I remember looking back to when we started, and, there would be days go by and not a single customer had called in. It's like, did we get any calls that day? And that was nerve wracking getting the business off the ground. So that was tough. I do remember those days.
I was just curious, when you guys are defining your working relationship, as the brothers, like, was one of you like super detail oriented, like has to finish everything, and the other person kind of has ideas and is good at sales? Did you guys have that kind of interesting dynamic, or what did that look like?
I would say the split that we had was I had a financial background and he had more of a construction background. And so, it was basically in general where he would kind of manage the crew and then I would kind of handle more of the back office kind of stuff. So it made it pretty easy to kind of delineate in that regard. But we still, obviously would kind of, play in others' world occasionally. But that helped us keep things aligned.
When I hear you talk about this, there's so many similarities to my business, but also success isn't a secret, right? So what I'm hearing here is like there's obviously a mixed group of skill sets between you and your brother, and of course the combined. Hey, it's back to gross profit margin, Drake. It's like 1 to 1 does not equal 2, right? It actually can equal 3. And a lot of our success at our company was because my wife, Sydney, was really good at the administrative tasks. Adam, my brother, was really good at the production tasks, and I was really good at sales and marketing. So for somebody even thinking about starting their own business with a family member, what would be like one of the 2 or 3 things you say, double check this before you take the lunge? Because you guys came pre-equipped with some pretty good skill sets.
Man, that's a great question. I would say make sure that you've got enough working capital. So you want to make sure you can kind of weather the storm, when things are, down, and there's going to be ups and downs, especially starting out of the gate. So I would say that would be one of the main things. As far as personality wise, I would say the main thing is just to be able to have good conversations and be open with each other is kind of if you've got a good relationship in that regard, I feel like you can kind of work through almost anything.
Which, to be clear, my brother and I do not have that type of relationship. But thank goodness my wife is a great referee. Hey, Drake, real quick, what's working capital?
Working capital is the amount of cash that you have in your bank account to be able to finance ongoing activities.
Did you have Webster's Dictionary up just then?
No, I just...
That rolled off the tongue so well.
Well, I've heard if you just say it confidently, it sounds correct.
Oh, yeah, it's like the Mitch Hedberg joke. It's like 72% of all statistics are made up on the spot. Hey, yeah. No, I wish I would have had that advice years ago, Brandon, because it's like, oh, wait, we can't just go and sell the job, take the deposit, and then bankroll it up, and then try to collect before I owe the vendors. It's like so many contractors, I think, do that where they forget, like, hey, well, you mentioned weather the storm. Most don't weather the storm because they can't deal with the cash cycles. They get one job that doesn't collect on time, and then bam, they're done.
And you go back to gross margin, you definitely want to kind of get your numbers in order. But starting out of the gate, you just want to have that cushion because you probably don't have all your, ducks in a row with reporting and all of that. So obviously you want to get that in place. But I would say starting out, just make sure you've got enough to, I would say, last 3 months with no business, just as a kind of a general rule of thumb.
Well, and especially in an asset-heavy business, one where you have to pay for a lot of materials, you have to float payroll for a week or two. And I hate it because I hear so many stories about contractors where, especially for subcontractors, where they're still waiting on the payment from another contractor. It's like, man, we're all in the same industry, and we cut our feet out from under each other so often. And it's like, man, no wonder nobody wants to be a contractor. Because, heck, they can't even be paid by other contractors because they don't have the day-to-day working capital. So, but segue real quick. So this is what's kind of cool. You've been in business how long, Brandon? 8 years?
From Foundation Doctor, yeah, it's been about 8 years.
Okay. That's a long run. And I'm sure you have seen companies come in and out of business Oh man, it's so infuriating when you're competing against somebody knowing that they're going to be out of business. And in a crowded market, you have done much better than I have in a very crowded market space of Charlotte. How do you navigate that, and how do you pivot your company around trying to compete in such a competitive space?
Yeah, I would say just focus on the customer experience is probably one of the main things that we try to get really good at. So because a significant amount of our lead sources are from referrals and neighbors that the customer tells their neighbor and that sort of thing. So if you do a good job, I think in general that will kind of just organically grow. Obviously, you need to layer on the marketing and the branding and all that, but I would say the most important piece is just do a really bang up job on the customer service side.
Well, and I think now that a lot of us as contractors are starting to feel the burn of lower lead quantities and things like that, we hear people so often just not. It's like, hey, what's your referral rate? Like, out of all your leads, how many of them are referrals? And I want to be very clear. I was embarrassed. Ours was like 12%, and meaning out of my total leads, only 12% were coming for referrals. And then I spoke to a company, I think in South Dakota, and their referral rate was like 50%. And I'm like, holy smokes. So 50%, and it was like, yeah, we're just really good at like doing good work. And it's like, that's the secret to success. I didn't have to read Think and Grow Rich. It's interesting because most of your work is completely like mine. It's under houses. Nobody sees it. And it's like, how the hell do you make a visual, like, wowing moment for those customers? I mean, how are you guys doing it?
Yeah, it is tough. I think it's more of, but it is an emotional kind of transaction for them. And it's something that, they're very concerned about. So they really want their home to be safe and sound. So when you can finish up a project and they feel that security on the back end, I think it's maybe not as exciting as showing off some sort of nice new granite countertop or something. They are still excited to give your name out.
And one quick question: you have several places in North Carolina that you're offering service. What were some of the unique things that you discovered when you were expanding out to multiple cities outside of the Charlotte area? How did that go?
So with the foundation repair company, Foundation Doctor, we're actually just around Charlotte. But when we did the house flipping, we did go all over the state of North Carolina. But for the residential foundation company, we cover all of Charlotte, a little bit of South Carolina. But yeah, it's just Charlotte.
Which is a massive market. I think well, it was just 2 or 3 years ago. It was the fastest growing city in the United States. And then I think Dallas took that just this last year. But it's like Bank of America is pulling so much commerce into that area. It's crazy. And any of you other two listeners out there that have never been to North Carolina, there's not a straight line to any place in North Carolina. It's either going through another town that's going to be met with traffic, and then you have to take a 90-degree turn and then go 30 miles in this direction just to turn right and go 30 miles in another direction to get to your destination. I do miss the Sheetz gas stations and the Bojangles, as I already mentioned before. So anybody that is wondering what the hell that is, just anytime you see a Sheetz gas station or a Bojangles, and I'm not being paid to say this, Drake. I wish I was. Actually, you know what? Even if they asked me, I'd still do it for free. But so Brandon, I love this because I think you're being very humble when you say, yeah, I was in banking and then I went into house flipping and then we kind of went into foundation repair. I know there was a lot more, what would you say, trials and tribulations that come with that. Mm-hmm. But then you grew this great business with your brother, and now you guys just went through another transition, which is typically something that's very difficult for, I would say, 90% of companies that they don't go through. But you and your brother actually had a little bit of a succession plan recently, right?
We did. Yep. So I just recently went through the SBA loan process and purchased the other half. So now I own all the company, and he is kind of going off and doing some ventures on his own. So yeah, we had talked about that for a while. So it's been, 8, I guess we were flipping homes before that. So it's been over 10 years that we've been kind of working together. And so it was something that was thought out and planned for.
Well, but most it doesn't go that well. It's with family, it's just like screw you, I'm out of the business. Send me a check. But you guys have done a pretty good job of this. So this wasn't a short transition. This has taken months, right?
It did, and especially with the SBA loan process, it was tough. It was lots of, I'm surprised they didn't ask for blood samples, but it was a lot of administrative work to get that accomplished. But at the same time, it was good to kind of, not necessarily rush into that. So it had some positives to it as well. But yeah, it was about, I would say, 6 months from start to finish to get the SBA loan to complete and check all those boxes.
Well, and a good friend of mine just recently mentioned this, and I thought this was genius. Drake, good, you knew the same individual, Brian Clifton. Brian's not one of our listeners, so we're fine. Yeah. But he said, I don't know why they call it an operating agreement. Nobody reads it until there's a disagreement. And, they should call it an operating disagreement. And I thought that was interesting because, what probably happened in this transaction is, you had to stop and think, oh, wow, we didn't think about that when we were flipping houses years ago. So, what advice would you give to somebody that's tied into a family business and somebody wants to have an exit?
I would say to make sure that everybody kind of knows what the plan, just have those conversations up front. A lot of times you don't want to broach the subject because it's awkward, maybe. But honestly, it shouldn't be awkward because you're not, at that point in time, you're not necessarily talking about price. That's the awkward piece is, you got to kind of talk about price and, one person thinks it's this and it kind of depends on your kind of angle if you're buying or selling. But prior to that, as long as you kind of have those conversations, I think that's the main thing is just keep the conversations going.
When you're structuring it, was it all in a lump sum, or did you guys structure it with earning? Is he still working in the business? Or there?
Yeah, good question. It was with the loan. It was kind of a lump sum situation. It just kind of made it easier from that perspective. Yep.
By the way, I know we'll probably cut this out, but I hope you don't, Drake. You and I are starting to get in the cadence. And for those that are listening but don't see us visually, I just look over at the monitor. And that's my way of saying, Drake, you get next question. And I think I just put him on the spot. And he's like, I don't know what to do with my hands. Sorry, buddy. Hey, we're getting in the swing of things. So, and I forgot. I was like, man, I didn't even prep you to make sure you had a beverage of choice on our trip today. But but that's okay. So I will say this, so you transition your brother, and from our conversations, everything's going really well. But as you know, we're very production heavy, and many of our companies in the home services world are very production heavy. So from a morale and culture perspective, how was that transition for the employees? What were some of your wins and losses there in saying, hey, we're transitioning an owner that you're going to see every day, that you've been used to seeing every day out of the business? Mm-hmm. Like, what advice do you have there, or how did that go?
It was something I was definitely concerned about, going into it. They had seen me. It wasn't like I was somebody completely new that was coming in. So that would be the hardest, I think, transition. If it's like an outside purchaser of a business and then, hey, I'm in charge. You've never seen me.
Yep, which we see a lot in our industry, unfortunately.
So one of the good things that the length of the SBA loan process allowed was for me to kind of step into more of the production side of the role a little bit earlier. So it was honestly kind of a smooth transition at that point because I had already been kind of doing that job. So that would be something I would say to anyone else is that if you were, kind of parting ways, maybe before it's rolled out, go ahead and insert yourself into those pieces of the business that might be a shock. Figure out what it is you're not involved with. Go ahead and connect yourself there before, you kind of roll it out.
Yeah, I understand how to lift a house 3 inches. Hey, let me show you. And then you accidentally lower it 3 inches. I hope none of my employees are listening, but if they are, I'm not offended by any means. But I got in the back of one of our trucks the other day, and I couldn't recognize like half the new equipment that they're using. And they're like, hey, can you start that reactor up for me and that rig? And I'm like, no, I can't. And they're like, really? And I'm like, and my leadership skills came in. I was like, I can, but why don't you show me how to do it? so I can inspect what I expect. And then later I fessed up to it. I was like, hey, man, I'm twice removed from it. So it was kind of good to get back out there. But also I think the humility showed that foreman. It was like, hey, man, this guy isn't just walking around bossing everybody around. I genuinely I don't know it all. And just like they don't know it all, it's just like we can get along in this world. So,
Well, that's one of the things too that's I've kind of embraced is that I haven't been, involved in the production side. I say involved. I'm involved, but I don't know exactly all the details on the rig and that sort of thing. And I've told them, I'm leaning on your expertise. So I think that was actually helpful when I transitioned. Is like I pulled in some of the senior leaders and I said, obviously I'm going to need your help. And I think it kind of made their job satisfaction go up, or at least I would hope so, because I really did need them, and they've stepped up.
yeah, and it gives them buy-in too. Yeah, it's like, hey, wait a minute, I'm more valuable than just going out and doing the work.
Right.
I can teach you. So this is kind of cool, and we're not going to segue into our final question. Hopefully you prep for that one, Brandon. Our final question for everybody. But before we get into that, you and I are both passionate about pay-for-performance systems. And Drake, this is so funny because I created our software company to help trades businesses with recruiting and retention and engagement of their employees, and then stumbled into performance payroll. Like an idiot, I should have started with that, and here I am. But Brandon here has created his own software system, which is, by the way, he's keeping all to himself right now. But one day it's going to take off and outgrow what we've done. But it's called Dirt Dollars. Is that right, Brandon? So give us a big 10,000-foot view of Dirt Dollars, because it's pretty cool. And then I hate to be such a tease to our two listeners, because they're like, well, that's great, but there's not a marketing website. There's no outbound marketing. Nobody can go to YouTube and see what it is, but I've seen it, and it is awesome. So give us an overview of that.
Yeah, no, it's something that it was bred out of just the hourly pay and having to babysit jobs, because if it's hourly, that's what you have to do. So we knew we needed a performance pay system. We just knew it. So we developed this system. We call it Dirt Dollars just because our guys are under homes and cross bases. So we finally call our guys Dirt Techs, right? That's our certified Dirt Tech. Is
Such a sexy name, by the way.
So we just played off of that, and we called the performance pay Dirt Dollars. So it's a way to supplement. We still pay hourly, and this is supplemented on top of that, right? It's not all performance pay, and it's not all hourly. It allows us to have that flexibility or that balance of you still have your baseline that you're going to get, but then if you do a good job, you can earn additional performance pay.
Well, and I love it because you're making dirt sexy, right? And it's not a sexy like industry, but well, I think your heart is where my heart is, and it's like, man, if we can create wealth and well-being for other individuals because they're more efficient, they shouldn't be limited, in their income. And also, Dave Ramsey in his book EntreLeadership talks about trust being like a rope, and like as you get more involved, you give a little bit more rope. And one thing that your program does that I have not seen a lot of programs do is as they progress in the role through tenure, through like the first 3 months, then they can graduate up to be like, okay, now we trust you. Unless you've changed that. But I think, as they come into that role for the first 90 days, they can start to see the potential that can be made, right?
Yep. And the other thing too that we really like, and we've really pushed to get this, is it's real time based on the previous day. So they can log in and see exactly how they're performing, if they're, how many hours are left on the job, so they can know, hey, if I wrap this up today, I'm going to make X. If I don't, it's going to go down to Y. So, and visually kind of display all of that, because one of the things that you mentioned, which I absolutely agree with, is you got to make it simple, because there's so much math behind the scenes to make it work. So you have to, because nobody wants to get out their calculator and figure all that out. You want to be able to just look at it in 5 seconds and realize, okay, if I take 2 guys with me and finish this up today, I'm going to make an extra, $150 or whatever it is.
So the big question that I always get is, with performance pay, is that going to screw up my quality? So what's your answer to that?
Yeah. Good question. We, at the same time we started instituting performance pay, we also instituted a quality check on the back end where we have a score, 1 to 21. And we have 4 different categories. And I think it's job site cleanliness, customer satisfaction, did we just overall quality, and did we install what we said we would install? So basically those 4, and then you get a bonus point if the customer pays, on site. And you can't get a 5 on the customer satisfaction unless you get a 5-star review. So there's a couple of different layers to that kind of allows us to, play around with that. But it's a score, 1 to 21. And, by having that in place, and if there's an engineer involved, we always get them to provide sign off on the back end. If there's, a county building inspection, we always have the county come behind us. The inspector checks that. So we have lots of checks in place. So I think the answer to that is, if you left it alone, I feel like it would have the quality go down. I think it would. So you have to make sure you still inspect and don't just trust the process.
Well, I'm the king of abdication at my company, not delegation, as some people say. But thank goodness for, I think what you're describing is table stakes, right? It's like, hey, at the end of the day, the customer is the person paying everybody's payroll, including the owners. So it's like they got to be taken care of. So Drake, you've heard this question said multiple times or asked multiple times, but as honorary guest host today in place of Dylan, I'm going to let you tee it up for our last big question. Do you have a good way to ask this question to Brandon?
So we'll see if I can ask this question so poorly that I can mess it up and brag about it. So Brandon, we've all had these things in business where we made that mistake. We're like, oh, I wish I couldn't have done that. But then later, when you're writing your autobiography, you get to brag about it and talk about that one time you messed up so bad that you brag about it now. What was that for you? So
believe it or not, Drake, I have actually never made any mistakes ever in business. So, I don't know how to answer that question. That's really awkward. No. So lots and lots of mistakes. So I have thought about this question, and I think the piece that comes to mind is that we started playing offense when we were playing defense. And what I mean by that is, if there was something going on, maybe a customer's a little dicey, maybe they're upset, maybe we're not sure if they're upset, we would kind of just wait, see what happens, maybe things will be fine. And by doing that, it just, when a customer comes at you and they're upset, it's game. I mean, you're on defense, right? You're trying to recover, and it is tough. But if you cut somebody's cable, and you knock on the door and you tell them, like, this is what happened. You cut somebody's, water line or whatever it is, and you play offense, it is so much better. And we had played defense for so long, and by doing that, many of those just bubbled into issues that we could have solved if we just, take ownership and tackle it head on. So, there's, 20, 30 examples in my mind that pop up with that. But in general, that's the takeaway that I would leave for listeners, is that if you're unsure that you need to do something because something just feels like it's not quite right, just jump into it, own it, call that customer, and take care of it.
I like that perspective, because I always thought offense in my mind in business was marketing, call center, sales. Defense was production, service, and accounting. But the fact is from a customer service perspective, that's pretty cool. Specifically of like, hey, problems are going to happen. We're just, we're in construction. Shit is going to happen every day. So I got a follow-up to that question is, how have you done with training and empowering kind of the production guys that hit that water line? And it's funny, they're so confident in the conference room, but then when they get to looking a customer in the eye, they turn into puppy dogs. So how's that gone in training those guys? Because sometimes it's just trying to just give them permission. But what's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough because there are some personalities that just want to kind of like, I'm just going to not say anything. I think the big thing is obviously telling them this is what, just own it, let us know. But, they need to see us react in a positive way. It's like, you're not in trouble because you cut the power. Like, you made a mistake, right? They need to, if they know there's a safe space there to kind of make mistakes, then I think, the rest of the production staff sees that and it just kind of breeds that culture.
Well, cool. Well, Brandon, listen, we've had a blast getting to know each other. Heck, you're a guest today, but we've gotten to know each other over the course of, gosh, I feel like 8-9 months, bouncing ideas off of one another, and it's been great. So how does somebody get a hold of you if they've got a question just about business, succession planning, banking, house flipping, hitting water lines? How do they get a hold?
I would say email me would probably be the best way. So it's my name, Brandon, BRANDON at foundationdoctornc for North Carolina.com. So Brandon at foundationdoctornc.com.
Good. And his cell phone is, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to give your cell phone out. Well, anyway, Brandon, I'm super pumped about what you're doing in the marketplace. Also with your software, I'm hoping that it becomes something that's widely available to the world someday. Hopefully, if I keep pushing you, it'll be widely available to the world in the next few months. But Drake, I got to cheers to you, buddy, because, man, we made it. First episode without Dylan. Poor guy. He's going to be so, upset that he wasn't a part of this episode. But honestly, he's sitting in an airport terminal right now. So he'll get over it, right? Because those are the best places to be, right?
Yeah, his life's already rough enough right now in an airport terminal.
Well, anyway, to all you listeners out there, we appreciate you, and we look forward to continuing these conversations. Get a hold of Brandon if you have any questions, and otherwise, we will see you guys next week. Thanks so much.
See you all later.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.